Hello and welcome to the Swine Disease Reporting System. This is the report number 59, where we're going to cover the findings from the SDRS related to the previous month, the month of December. My name is Edson Magalhães here at the SDRS studio.
Hi, my name is Giovanni Trevisan at the SDRS.
Hi, my name is Guilherme, also at SDRS.
Hello, Daniel Linhares with SDRS.
And today, as usual, we're going to go through the findings, as I mentioned, from the previous month related to the SDRS. But also we have a discussion with our invited guest, special guest today. Here we have Dr. Clayton Johnson. Dr. Johnson is a partner in veterinary at Carthage Veterinary Service, located in Carthage, Illinois. And he obtained his DVM and executive veterinary certificate from the University of Illinois. Dr. Johnson has an international reputation on bioeconomic models and strategies to manage swine disease worldwide. Dr. Johnson, thanks for accepting our invitation and welcome to the Swine Disease Reporting System podcast.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Edison. Great to be a part of it. I appreciate all the work you guys do for the industry. Happy to contribute to your podcast here today.
Very good. So now, before we start our discussion with Dr. Clayton Johnson, let's cover the findings from the previous month of December on this report, the report 59, as I mentioned. So here, when we move to the first page of the report, here's the page that covers PCR detection of PRRS. So there are many different charts with different information. But here we can see that the red line represents the percentage of the observed percentage of positive cases for this time of the year, and is within the predicted bands for this time of the year. And when we break down by age category, this percentage of positive case, we can see there is a slight decrease in the red line here, which is wing to market. From November to December, there was a slight decrease, but with an increase from November to December in sow farm, the percentage of positive cases. Overall, important to note here that the highest detection of the lineage 1C variant, the RFLP 144, since its emergence with 357 sequences in November 2022, as we can see here, and over 200 in December. Iowa has been more than 1,000 sequences detected of this variant, becoming the most predominant state. And Missouri, for example, jumped from 6 sequences in 2021 to over 200 in 2022. And one of the comments of the advisory group that several PRRS outbreaks have been occurring with this lineage 1C variant strain, which contributed to the high activity of this strain in Iowa. And the outbreaks have been concentrating in growth to finish size and had increased lateral outbreaks that seems to have leveled off in December. And even though there was a decrease in PRRS detection in growing sites in December, the high activity in November increased the pressure of infection in sow farms. So we're going to keep an eye on this because we see a slight increase here in the sow farm age category in December compared to November. Another comment important here is that the lineage 1C RFLP 124, the detection has continued to increase since the high activity that started in August, where reported in the SDRS in August. So it's still increasing. So in 2022, the number of sequence of this strain jumped from 116 to 240 cases, so more than double being detected, especially Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Iowa, Missouri, and Minnesota since November. Another comment from the advisory group related to the lineage 1C variant, the 144 strain, we saw that it's the most predominant in most of the states, but in states that are especially east of the Mississippi River, this lineage, this pattern is not observed. So they mentioned that this might be due the low number of pigs coming into this site and more coming out from these states to other areas, to the Midwest, for example. So this might be the reason that we are not seeing the lineage 1C variant 144 strain there being the most predominant. When we move here to the enteric coronavirus page, overall we can see a moderate increase in the percentage of positive cases for Delta coronavirus and PED from November to December, and we're going to keep an eye on that, but overall within the expected values for the predicted bands. The third page is the page that covers mycoplasma and PCV2, and important to note here that we are seeing the lowest detection of mycoplasma in sow farms since 2010 for this year. So we can see here the blue line in the chart, which is the sow farm percentage of positive cases. this trend for this year, it's been the lowest since 2010, so important to note that. The next page is the page that covers flu, swine influenza virus. And one important thing that occurred here is that comparing December to November, there was a big drop in the number of positive cases here from November to December. And the advisory group highlighted that the influenza A virus was very active in November, and the decreasing detection in December is aligned with field observation of less activity, indicating that the influenza A virus activity peak may be over. We didn't see that trend in other years, for example, 2021, 2020. So this was a good finding here. We see this trend occurring this year specifically, a big drop here in the number of cases, positive cases. And the last page of the report, which is the page that covers tissue diagnosis, specifically from the ISU VDL data. Here we are breaking down by the systems that these pathogens are being diagnosed, so digestive, respiratory, nervous, and this chart will show the most predominant pathogens being diagnosed. So you can see, for example, for digestive, E. coli and rotavirus are the major ones, the big circles here. But one important thing to notice from this month is that here in our data we are seeing a big increase, an increase in the diagnosis for specifically Delta coronavirus and PD. So we're gonna keep an eye on that. So that was it in terms of the major findings from the SDRS report of this month. Now let's move on to the discussion with Dr. Clayton Johnson.
So Dr. Johnson, we understand that the industry has made several progress towards PRRS control and elimination, right? If you think about biosecurity, diagnostics, vaccination, herd closure, so on and so forth. But yet we don't really talk much about regionally or nationally eliminating or eradicating completely the disease, right? Or the virus, what's missing in that puzzle? How can we advance so that 10 years from now, we're really talking about a regional or national eradication program?
Well, Daniel, there's a lot to unpack there. Let's start with what we know. We know how to prevent PRRS introductions into swine farms. There are certain technologies and techniques that you need to have to be successful with biosecurity, but we know what those technologies and techniques are, right? We can prevent introduction from really any of the potential routes of introduction that are out there. Again, not all farms are set up with those technologies, and a lot of that comes down to being cost efficient. Farms that don't break frequently with PRRS struggle to invest in additional biosecurity infrastructure because their cost of PRRS, so to say, simply doesn't always justify that level of investment at that individual farm. But we know how to prevent PRRS introductions. We also know how to eliminate PRRS at the farm level. We know how to put together a plan that's not anything novel, right? Load, close, expose, or depop, repop are both effective options to eliminate PRRS at the farm level. So we know how to prevent PRRS and we know how to eliminate. Where I think we struggle at the industry level is with some sort of aligned goals. Everybody has their own strategy for how they want to manage PRRS or what success in PRRS management looks like. For some individual farms, being PRRS naive is the only option. They won't entertain any other option. Maybe they are a multiplier farm that produces genetics or a boar stud that produces semen. And having PRRS at any level, vaccination, wild type, is just not an option. For other producers, maybe they are in dense areas and choose to use a modified live vaccine. So they are living with some level of PRRS on their farm, even if it's just a vaccine. For other producers, they say, eliminating wild type is not my choice. I'm going to live with a wild type infection, and I'm going to continuously expose my gilts to the wild type PRRS that I think I have on my farm. And so you get these kind of different goals, different scenarios relative to the infection status at each farm that ultimately compromises sometimes what you want to do at your farm. I always tell producers that the neighborhood PRRS status is going to be the neighborhood PRRS status, meaning that if there's somebody in the neighborhood that has PRRS, you're probably going to inherit it from that other producer or that other farm at some point. And so you really need aligned goals across producers, across farms, regionally, in order to have an overall regional outcome. And if eradication is an industry goal, it would have to be something that all producers agreed upon, all producers pursued simultaneously. And you can imagine the difficulty with pulling that off, the difficulty with getting all producers to say, we're going to accept this PRRS strategy, particularly if eradication is the goal. It's just hard to get that sort of alignment, hard to get that sort of industry inertia to go put all those individual farms through the eradication process simultaneously and get everyone to accept that kind of long-term vision that's best for the industry. The other thing I would add there, Daniel, is that all of our biosecurity barriers we put in place are effective, but inevitably they do select for future strains of PRRS that can evade those barriers, okay? And I think you can look back at time and help understand. When we were all young and getting involved in the pig industry, PRRS was more of a sexually reproduced virus, right? When boars naturally mated gilts and sows, there was transmission of PRRS through that natural mating event. And as we stopped the natural mating and went to artificial insemination, we probably selected for viruses that were more respiratory in nature. Now, as we went to multi-site production, right, we probably selected for viruses that were capable of aerosol transmission because the virus has to find a new host. So if the new host is just the next barn, the virus doesn't have to effectively transmit very well, right? The virus doesn't have to travel through the air very well or live outside the host very long. But as we go to multi-site production, now the virus does need to have additional properties that evade our biosecurity restrictions to jump from one host population to another. And it's just an unintended consequence of the efforts we've made towards biosecurity that we somewhat select for viruses that can sustain themselves in our industry. And with a virus like PRRS that mutates all the time and mutates with no strategy, we often think of the mutation as like the bad actor that the virus intentionally created. The virus just spews out genetic mutants into the environment and lets the environment dictate which ones get to survive and which ones get to sustain. So it's kind of an inevitable consequence that when we put barriers around the virus, we naturally select and promote the strains that are able to evade those barriers.
Well, that reminds me of it's a good point that we select for virus and things that occur. But if you look for the SDRS data, there was science. The last couple of months, there was one specific strain of PRRS virus that's named according to lineage 1C, LFLP 124. And we start to see this strain to be detected in a couple of more states, and it's kind of creating a shape there of increased activity. I don't know if you had experience with that in the field, but if you had, could you share your thoughts about what's your experience with that strain and what is your thought about this new strain that has been detected there?
Yeah, Giovanni, it seems like we were just talking about the most recent new strain, and so it's discouraging to me that we're already talking about another very different strain that appears to be evading some of our biosecurity practices. But that's the reality, I think, that we're looking at. I know producers in Illinois, producers in Missouri that have been challenged by this new strain that you mentioned. Those producers are seeing a wide range of impact to their farms. And we see a range in virulence with all strains of PRRS, but I'd say this has been surprisingly variable in terms of the outcome. I know of some producers that have been infected with this strain and have noticed it, have had a PRRS impact, but let's call the impact moderate at best, not a disastrous impact. I know of other producers that have had disastrous impacts. I know of producers that have lost 20% of the pregnant animals in their herd in a 3-week period from this virus, and with about 16% of that being abortions. So 16% of all the pregnant animals aborted within a 3-week period, and the other percent being sow death. Just they lost 4% of their sow inventory in a 3-week period. And that particular producer actually was a vaccinated herd. was a herd that theoretically should have one of the better outcomes against any strain of wild type PRRS. So it's been frustrating for producers in terms of the variability of outcomes that they've seen from moderate to extremely severe. And I would say it's also been a bit surprising for the variation that we see in the homology or heterology of the sequences. Normally, when you have a new strain, you don't see a lot of variation in at least the OR5 sequence. You know, if you sequence the OR5 from one producer to another, it's maybe 0.1, 0.2, 0.3% different on OR5. In this particular virus, we see up to 2% variation from one farm to another. So to me, that suggests that it's not a brand new variant, but for some reason, it's very effective at transmitting in the area where we see a lot of pigs here in Illinois and Missouri. And it's transmitted across production systems, it's transmitted across geographies, and much like we heard of with the variant lineage 1C, 144, we have seen it transmit in unique ways, let's call it. And you already have some veterinarians and producers questioning is this a situation where, like the lineage 1C variant 144, we're producing more virus particles per pig infected, and that's potentially one of the reasons why we're seeing the transmission at such a high level, is that there's just so much virus being produced by each individual pig that gets infected that the environment is more heavily contaminated. There's more logs of virus. And as we know with disinfectants reduce logs of virus, but they don't necessarily take every virus to zero. We're starting with billions and billions of viral particles.
Dr. Johnson, still talking about PRRS virus, but now moving to a different strain right now, the L1C variant, 144, that the last month in the SDRS, we had the highest number of detections since 2020. Over 300 sequences were detected and classified as this lineage and RFLP. And also we can see that the scenario is changing. So we had most of the detections in 2021 concentrated in Minnesota and Iowa. And now we are having these detections in South Dakota, Nebraska, and even Missouri, that is having another high number of detections. So why the industry is having so much problem to control this specific strain? And also why some of these regions like Illinois and Indiana that we have just few detections do not become like these epidemic regions of this specific strain L1C variant?
Great questions, Guilherme. I think to your first question about why are we having so much trouble with this virus and why is it moving so much? I don't know is the most honest answer, but to speculate, one of the things that's very unique with that virus is the volume of virus that we see in infected pigs. And we generally infer the volume of virus based on the CT counts of the PCRs that we do. And we've learned with PED that we can get some really low CT counts, but we also see it with PCV2, and it seems like with each pathogen, there's kind of a range of CTs that you see. But those ranges may be highly variable pathogen to pathogen. Historically, with PRRS viruses, we would see a range of maybe the high teens up to the low 20s on acute infections. And with the lineage 1C variant 144, we've seen much lower CT counts. And as I understand it with CTs, every 2.5 to 3.5 CTs, you're talking about another log of virus. And a log of virus means a 10-fold increase in virus. So as you move from one log to another, you move from 10 to 100 to 1,000, 10,000. So every drop in 2.5 to 3.5 CTs is a big difference in the volume of virus that gets produced. And I often tell producers the battle of pathogens is very much a numbers game. And what I mean by that is it's no different than a war, right? Good guys versus bad guys. And the bad guys in this situation are the number of virus particles. And you can almost think of them as soldiers. So as an infected pig is producing a lower CT count, it's producing a lot more bad soldiers. There's a lot more bad soldiers that are entering the fight in favor of PRRS transmission. And, I mentioned disinfection before. If you read disinfectant labels, they will all have some sort of a claim regarding the number of logs that they can reduce. But they don't, their claim is never that we take it to zero. If you read on like a bottle of Lysol, say 99.99% of the loop or something like that. They never say we remove 100%, because the reality is that enemy army can always be greater than what our intervention can handle. Good guys versus bad guys, right? So I think that's the first thing we have to recognize with that variant virus is it produces a lot more virus than its ancestors, and it's just a lot more stress on all of our biosecurity strategies to be perfect every time. Your second question on why do we see it geographically in some areas and sustain and become endemic in some areas, but maybe not in others? I think a lot of that comes down to pig. At the end of the day, a lot of virus PRRS strain introduction into new areas is just PRRS that comes in with wean pigs. And pigs move across the Mississippi River, but they don't move across the Mississippi River from west to east very often. Most of the time, if pigs are moving across the Mississippi River, they are moving from the east to the west, okay? And with Iowa and Minnesota being obvious areas of concentration, that's where the packing plants are, so that's where the growing pigs are going to be. And so I think that's a lot of it, that's what it comes down to. If the variant virus would have started in North Carolina, I think absolutely we would see it move, through Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota. But those viruses that start on the west side of the Mississippi River, whether that's Nebraska, South Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa, whatever, they don't really move east. They're not going to make it back to North Carolina or Indiana or Illinois because the pigs simply don't move that direction.
Yeah, that makes sense. Dr. Johnson, now let's switch gears to PED. Our last question for you here today. So for PED in 2021, for example, we had the lowest detection of this virus since its emergence in 2013. On the other hand, in 2022, this year, the levels of PED detection increased again, and they are above the expected values for this virus based on the SDRS algorithms. So in your opinion, what the industry can do to control this virus using the windows of opportunity? As we see, there is some seasonality, some seasons that we have a lower detection, so we can take advantage of that. So what's your opinion on that? How can we take advantage as an industry of these windows? And also, should we think about PED elimination programs?
Yeah. To your last question, Edison, I would say yes. Absolutely, we should think about PED elimination programs. The reality is the U.S. swine industry is going to have to eliminate disease at some point. It may not be PED. It may be a foreign animal disease. But it's been a long time since we have practiced disease elimination. We have some nice historical track record with pseudorabies. And I can remember as a young man being involved in some pseudorabies eradication events. My dad's a mixed animal veterinarian. And as soon as I was big enough to hold pigs, to snare pigs, to help him to bleed for the pseudorabies eradication events, I was a full-time weekend and night job for me. So we've got history, right? We've done this in the past, but there aren't many people who remember those eradication days of pseudorabies. And PED is a very different virus, but I think if nothing else, we should target a disease like PED that has existing value today, that has value for U.S. producers if we eliminate it. But we also need to think more broadly than just the value of PED. We need to think the value of practicing that where it's not the government telling us there's exactly what you're going to do in this disease control situation, right? Because if we start the practice with ASF or foot and mouth, producers are not going to be in control of those decisions, okay? So we have an opportunity here to lay out our own pathway to demonstrate success in managing a foreign animal-like disease elimination process. And if we can do that, we will get a big leg up, big set of lessons learned to apply to future disease elimination processes, which we won't control the timeline on, and we may have to do very, very, very urgently with more limited information than we have about PED. So I'm 100% in favor of the industry promoting the discussion on PED elimination, talking about the barriers. That's where the discussion has to happen, right? What are the reasons we can't do this? What are the reasons we won't do this? And then talk about putting industry resources towards those barriers. That's how you put together a plan for a big project like that. Will we actually do it? To be determined. But I think the discussion has to exist as often and as frequently as they can, and at the highest levels of decision makers in our industry, because ultimately everybody has to be bought into that. PED is a bit of a unique disease in how it transmits and where the reservoir of infection is. And I truly believe the reservoir of infection of PED is in those market pigs, and particularly right now in the winter. When packing plants get contaminated with PED, we tend to see a lot of our actively marketing finishing sites or wean to finish sites become contaminated from transport biosecurity failures. When I say failures, that's probably not fair. A lot of producers don't take any biosecurity risk mitigation steps when they're marketing their commercial market pigs, meaning they accept dirty trailers to come to their farm. And I'm not shooting bullets at anybody. The reality is we don't have enough truck wash infrastructure to wash all the market hog trailers and dry all the market hog trailers tomorrow if we said that we wanted to do that. But it's the obvious resource that we can apply to PED and lower the level of finishing pig infection with PED. And I think doing that will inherently lower the level of sow farm infection with PED. If we get rid of the wet reservoirs of market finishing pigs, I think we'll see the numbers of PED infections in our sow farms go down. Why are we seeing a worse year this year than in previous years? I don't know is, again, my best answer, but I'm on here to speculate, so I'm always happy to do that. If I had to speculate, I would say that labor issues are probably some of the challenge, and specifically labor issues within the transportation industry. We in the pig industry know the labor issues on our farms. We have a hard time sourcing labor for our farms right now. I can assure you that the same is true for transportation companies. And that's true for labor, not only for the truck drivers, but also for their truck washes. When we're short on drivers, when we're short on washes, or the ability to do a good wash job, shortcuts are going to happen. If we don't have drivers, we're not going to have the downtime. If we don't have employees at the truck wash, we may not be able to wash as many trailers as we would ideally want to. And so that would be the biggest thing that I would point out is maybe something unique to this winter is there's just a lot of stress on the labor market. Transporting pigs is a difficult job, thankless job, and working in our truck washes is a difficult job and a thankless job. And so I have to imagine that for some producers in some situations, they're making compromises that they don't want to make because the reality is they don't have any other options.
Oh, very good. Yeah, that was it for this edition, guys. Thanks, Dr. Johnson, for joining us. It was a very good discussion on PRRS and PD, very good thoughts. And I hope to see you guys next month. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for the opportunity to contribute.
Thank you.
Thank you.